today's session of general psychology, we will be studying about autonomic nervous system. The main objectives of this lesson are to understand what is nervous system and psychology, and autonomic nervous system and its functions. Introduction. In this module, we will explore the biological side of psychology by paying particular attention to the brain and to the nervous system. Understanding the nervous system is vital to understanding psychology in general. It is through the nervous system that we experience pleasure and pain, feel emotions, learn and use language, and plan goals. Just to name a few examples. Nervous system development across lifespan. As a species, humans have evolved a complex nervous system and brain over millions of years. Comparisons of our nervous system with those of other animals such as chimpanzees show some similarities. This was identified by Darwin in the year 1859. Researchers can also use fossils to study the relationship between brain volume and human behavior over the course of evolutionary history. Homo habilis, for instance, a human ancestor living about 2 million years ago, shows a larger brain volume than its own ancestors, but far less than modern Homo sapiens. The main difference between humans and other animals in terms of brain development is that humans have a much more developed frontal cortex, that is, the front part of the brain associated with planning. Interestingly, a person's unique nervous system develops over the course of their lifespan in a way that resembles the evolution of nervous system in animals across vast stretches of time. For example, the human nervous system begins developing even before a person is born. It begins as a simple bundle of tissue that forms into a tube and extends along the head to tail plane, becoming the spinal cord and brain. 25 days into its development, the embryo has a distinct spinal cord as well as hindbrain, midbrain and forebrain. What exactly is this nervous system that is developing and what does it do? The nervous system can be thought of as the body's communication network that consists of all nerve cells. There are many ways in which we can divide the nervous system to understand it more clearly. One common way to do so is by parsing it into central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Each of these can be subdivided in turn. Let's take a closer look, more in-depth look at each, and don't worry, the nervous system is complicated with many parts and many new vocabulary words. It might seem overwhelming at first, but through the figures and a little study, you can get it. Nervous system. The nervous system can be divided into two major subdivisions, the central nervous system CNS and the peripheral nervous system PNS. The central nervous system is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body. We will focus on the peripheral nervous system. Later, you can study about the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is made up of thick bundle of axons called nerves, carrying messages back and forth between the central nervous system and the muscles, organs and senses in the periphery of the body, that is, everything outside the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system has two major subdivisions, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is associated with activities traditionally thought of as conscious or voluntary. It is involved in the relay of sensory and motor information to and from the central nervous system. Therefore, it consists of motor neurons and sensory neurons. Motor neurons carrying instructions from the central nervous system to the muscles are efferent fibers. Efferent means moving away from. Sensory neurons carrying sensory information to the central nervous system are afferent, AFFERENT fibers. Afferent means moving toward. Each nerve is basically a two-way superhighway containing thousands of axons, both efferent and efferent. The autonomic nervous system controls our internal organs and glands and is generally considered to be outside the realm of voluntary control. It can be further subdivided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. The sympathetic nervous system is involved in preparing the body for stress-related activities. The parasympathetic nervous system is associated with returning the body to routine day-to-day operations. The two systems have complementary functions, operating in tandem to maintain the body's homeostasis. Homeostasis is a state of equilibrium in which biological conditions such as body temperature are maintained at optimal levels. To sum it all up, the brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is comprised of the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The somatic nervous system transmits sensory and motor signals to and from the central nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls the function of our organs and glands and can be divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Sympathetic activation prepares us for fight or flight, while parasympathetic activation is associated with normal functioning under relaxed conditions. In this figure, it shows the anatomy of the autonomic nervous system with functions. We can see that the parasympathetic nervous system functions, which include pupil function, stimulation of saliva, heart rate, bronchi, stimulation of digestion and bladder functioning. Whereas the sympathetic nervous system functions include pupil dilation, inhibition of salivation, increase in heart rate, decrease in the bronchi, inhibits digestion and also includes contraction of bladder. In this figure, the region of spinal cord shows the association of nerves and terminal ganglia, which include the target organs. Autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, or ANS, formerly referred to as the vegetative nervous system, is a division of the peripheral nervous system that supplies smooth muscle and glands and thus influences the function of internal organs. The autonomic nervous system is a control system that acts largely unconsciously and regulates bodily functions such as the heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, pupillary response, urination and sexual arousal. This system is the primary mechanism in control of the fight or flight response. The autonomic nervous system is regulated by integrated reflexes through the brainstem to the spinal cord and organs. Autonomic functions include control of respiration, cardiac regulation, vasomotor activity and certain reflex actions such as coughing, sneezing, swallowing, vomiting. Those are then subdivided into other areas and are also linked to autonomic subsystems and the peripheral nervous system. The hypothalamus just above the brainstem acts as an integrator for autonomic functions, receiving autonomic regulatory input from the limbic system. The autonomic nervous system has three branches: the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system and the enteric nervous system. Some textbooks do not include the enteric nervous system as a part of this system. Now let us look at the sympathetic nervous system that is often considered with the fight or flight system, while the parasympathetic nervous system is often considered the rest and digest or feed and breed system. In many cases, both of these systems have opposite actions, wherein one system activates a physiological response and the other inhibits it. An older simplification of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems as excitatory and inhibitory was overturned due to the many exceptions found. A more modern characterization is that the sympathetic nervous system is a quick response mobilizing system and the parasympathetic nervous system is a more slowly activated dampening system. But even this has exceptions, such as in sexual arousal and orgasms, where both play a role. There are inhibitory and excitatory synapses between neurons. A third subsystem of neurons has been named as non-noradrenergic and cholinergic transmitters because they use nitric oxide as neurotransmitter and are integral in autonomic function, in particularly in the gut and the lungs. Although the autonomic nervous system is also known as the visceral nervous system and it is connected with the motor side. Most autonomic functions are involuntary, but they can often work in conjunction with the somatic nervous system, which provides voluntary control. Structure. Let us understand the structure of autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is divided into the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic division emerges from the spinal cord in the thoracic and lumbar areas, terminating around L2 and 3. The parasympathetic division has craniosacral outflow, meaning that the neurons begin at the cranial nerves, specifically the oculomotor nerve, facial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve and vagus nerve, and sacral S2 and S4 spinal cord. The autonomic nervous system is unique in that it requires a sequential 2-neuron efferent pathway. The preganglionic neuron must first synapse onto a postganglionic neuron before innervating the target organ. The preganglionic or first neuron will begin at the outflow and will synapse at the postganglionic or second neuron's cell body. The postganglionic neuron will then synapse at the target organ. Let us understand the function of autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions typically function in opposition to each other, but this opposition is better termed complementary in nature rather than antagonistic. For an analogy, one may think of the sympathetic division as the accelerator and the parasympathetic division as the brake. The sympathetic division typically functions in actions requiring quick responses. The parasympathetic division functions with actions that do not require immediate reaction. The sympathetic system is often considered the fight or flight system, while the parasympathetic system is often considered the rest and digest or feed and breed system. However, many instances of sympathetic and parasympathetic activity cannot be asked to fight or rest situations. For example, standing up from a reclining or sitting position would entail an unsustainable drop in blood pressure if not for a compensatory increase in the arterial sympathetic tonus. Another example is the constant second to second modulation of heart rate by sympathetic and parasympathetic influences as a function of the respiratory cycles. In general, these two systems should be seen as permanently modulating vital functions in a usually antagonistic fashion to achieve homeostasis. Higher organisms maintain their integrity via homeostasis, which relies on negative feedback regulation, which in turn typically depends on the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic system controls a variety of internal processes including digestion, blood pressure, heart rate, urination and defecation, pupillary response, breathing, respiratory rate, sexual response, body temperature, metabolism, electrolyte balance, production of body fluids including sweat and saliva, emotional responses. The autonomic nerve pathways connect different organs to the brainstem or spinal cord. There are also two key neurotransmitters or chemical messengers that are important for communication within the autonomic nervous system. Acetylcholine is often used in the parasympathetic system to have an inhibiting effect. Norepinephrine often works within the sympathetic system to have a stimulating effect on the body. Potential problems when the parasympathetic and sympathetic components of the autonomic nervous system become out of sync. People can experience an autonomic disorder also called as dysautonomia. There are numerous types of autonomic disorders, each with its own unique set of symptoms, which include acute autonomic paralysis, efferent baroreflex failure, familial dysautonomia, Riley-Day syndrome, idiopathic orthostatic hypotension, multiple system atrophy, orthostatic hypotension, postprandial hypotension, pure autonomic failure, secondary orthostatic hypotension. These disorders can occur alone or as a result of other conditions that cause disruption in the autonomic nervous system, which include aging, alcohol or drug abuse, autoimmune disease, cancer, chronic fatigue syndrome, diabetes, Parkinson's disease, peripheral neuropathy, spinal cord disorders, and trauma. Symptoms. If you or someone is experiencing disruptions in the autonomic nervous system, they may experience one or more of the following symptoms. Some people experience one cluster of symptoms at one time and another set of symptoms at other times. The symptoms can be fleeting and unpredictable or triggered by specific situations or actions like after ingesting certain foods or after standing up quickly. Difficulty emptying the bladder, disturbing aches and pains, dizziness or lightheadedness upon standing, erectile dysfunction, faintness or even actual fainting spells, fatigue and inertia, gastrointestinal symptoms, hypotension, that is low blood pressure, lack of pupillary response, lack of sweat or profuse sweating, numbness and tingling, severe anxiety or depression, tachycardia, fast heart rate, urinary incontinence. Diagnosis and treatment include: diagnosis of an autonomic disorder requires a doctor's evaluation, which may include a physical examination, recording blood pressure when the patient is both lying down and standing, testing of sweat response, and an electrocardiogram. Diagnosing an autonomic disorder is often tricky since both the physical exam and laboratory tests can come back normal. There is currently no cure. However, depending on the type of autonomic disorder, there are ways to treat the symptoms. Case study: caffeine effects. Caffeine is a bioactive ingredient found in commonly consumed beverages such as coffee, tea, and sodas. Short-term physiological effects of caffeine include increased blood pressure and sympathetic nerve outflow. Habitual consumption of caffeine may inhibit physiological short-term effects. Consumption of caffeinated espresso increases parasympathetic activity in habitual caffeine consumers. However, decaffeinated espresso inhibits parasympathetic activity in habitual caffeine consumers. It is possible that other bioactive ingredients in decaffeinated espresso may also contribute to the inhibition of parasympathetic activity in habitual caffeine consumers. Caffeine is capable of increasing work capacity while individuals perform strenuous tasks. In one study, caffeine provoked a greater maximum heart rate while a strenuous task was being performed compared to a placebo. This tendency is likely due to caffeine's ability to increase sympathetic nerve outflow. Furthermore, this study found that recovery after intense exercise was slower when caffeine was consumed prior to exercise. This finding is indicative of caffeine's tendency to inhibit parasympathetic activity in non-habitual consumers. The caffeine-stimulated increase in nerve activity is likely to evoke other physiological effects as the body attempts to maintain homeostasis. The effects of caffeine on parasympathetic activity may vary depending on the position of the individual when autonomic responses are measured. One study found that the seated position inhibited autonomic activity after consumption of 75 milligrams of caffeine. However, parasympathetic activity increased in the supine position. This finding may explain why some habitual caffeine consumers who consume 75 milligrams or less do not experience short-term effects of caffeine if their routine requires many hours in a seated position. It is important to note that the data supporting increased parasympathetic activity in the supine position was derived from an experiment involving participants between the ages of 25 and 30 who are considered healthy and sedentary. Caffeine may influence autonomic activity differently for individuals who are more active or elderly. Summary: the brain and spinal cord make up the central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is comprised of the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The somatic nervous system transmits sensory and motor signals to and from the central nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls the function of our organs and glands and can be divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Sympathetic activation prepares us for fight or flight, while the parasympathetic activation is associated with normal functioning under relaxed conditions.